views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
I believe that mining has to pay its fair share.
Mining pays every tax every other business pays, plus an industry-specific tax.
Tonight on Politics Now, mining in the hot seat. We hear from both sides as the legislature considers raising taxes on the mining industry. Saying goodnight to daylight saving time, the latest effort by lawmakers to keep us on Pacific Standard Time all year round. And we continue our interviews with new members of the legislature. We'll speak with Democratic Assemblywoman Elaine Marzola.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you very much for joining us on Politics Now. I'm John Langler. Up in Carson City, lawmakers are trying to fill the state budget during the legislative session. With opportunities to get more money into state coffers few and far between, legislators are honing in on one of the few options they actually have. And the main one is the net proceeds tax. It's specific to the mining industry. But Nevada's Constitution puts a cap on how much can be charged there. Before mining can be asked to pay more, that cap has to be removed. And that process has to pass the legislature twice and then have a general election ballot. Well, it already went through the last summer special session, and if lawmakers pass it again in this session, this is going to go to a public vote. So let's dig into both sides of the so-called mining tax. First, we spoke with the president of the Nevada Mining Association, Tyree Gray. He's relatively new in that job, and he's also the first African American to hold it.
Is there any way you think that this legislative session ends without additional taxes being imposed or, as you say, sort of more burdens, I guess, put on your industry?
Well, I would say that what we're looking at right now is to have good conversation. I can't read the tea leaves, unfortunately, over what will happen over the next 90 days a session. If I could, I would definitely tell you that. But I will tell you that the mining industry has been at the table to talk about revenue increases, and we've always been at the table to talk about revenue increases. We supported the 2015 revenue increase in the commerce tax. We've continuously supported revenue increases throughout the state's history. So it's not uncommon for the mining industry to be at the table to talk about revenue increases. But again, we do have to look at broad-based solutions. Industry-specific taxes are never good tax policy. They place burden on a particular industry that then could have negative downfall. And what we've seen is, by the estimations that some of these tax passages could lead to upwards to 30% contraction in the mining industry. And, there are 37,000 families throughout Nevada that depend on the mining sector in order to have their livelihood. So when you look at 30%, it's really difficult to say to 12,000 people that, hey, you might be being shifted from a $95,000 a year job onto the state social safety net. And what does that actually do to those people? And what does that actually do to those communities? Because the one thing that we're losing, and particularly when you talk about AJR1 and SJR1, is that it's not necessarily the impact to the mining industry, it's really the impact to the county. We're removing tax revenue from counties that then the counties will presumably have to go back to the state and try to recoup.
Why are you one of the main ways that they think they can raise more revenue? If things are going so great, what's wrong with the way it is now?
Well, I think that there's always a need to take a look at our current systems and really appraise what our tax mechanisms are. Again, I think it's within the legislature's purview, I should say, to look at the tax scheme that exists in Nevada. And I think what's really important is that Nevada's taxes were always based on property tax. Again, we've added taxes along the way, and we've kind of, add a tax here, add a tax there. But really a comprehensive study of taxes in Nevada, I don't think has really been undertaken in a number of years. And I think if not for the pandemic, I think, the governor had signaled that 2021 would be a time where we would talk about taxes, not just on a particular industry, but all the way around. I think it's important to recognize that Nevada currently abates $1.2 billion in property tax every year. And so that's an astronomical figure that would, be able to be used toward education and healthcare funding and, continuing to diversify our economy. So I think, we really have to look at the whole tax system and not just the tax system on a particular industry. Mining pays every tax every other business pays, plus an industry-specific tax. it's important to recognize that. So, if the four people go have a slice of pizza, and it's $2 a person, we put our $2 on the table just like everybody else does, and then we have an additional tax that we pay on top of that $2 to share that pie.
Meanwhile, Nevada Democratic activists say mining is not paying its fair share. So how much should they pay? The I-Team's David Charnes spoke with the executive director of Battleborn Progress, Annette Magnus.
It is a large Nevada industry. So is this something that is realistic?
The mining tax is absolutely realistic, and it shouldn't matter where you live in the state of Nevada. I know the mining companies are very much trying to pit rural Nevadans against, southern Nevadans and northern Nevadans who live in urban communities. But this is a Nevada issue, period. It doesn't matter where you live. I was born and raised in Nevada. I'm a second generation Nevadan. And I believe that mining has to pay its fair share. They never have. And you see the way mining is taxed in other states around the West, and they are paying their fair share. But in the state of Nevada, they were written into our Constitution in 1864 and have been there ever since. And so they're paying some small fees and other things, but they are not paying full taxes for the minerals that they extract out of the ground. I think the best one is AJR 1, Assembly Joint Resolution 1. What we're talking about is the constitutionally capped rate of 5% on net proceeds, moving that to 7.75% on gross proceeds, bringing an additional $543 million a year. That would be huge for our state, and that would fill a lot of those gaps that we're seeing, not just during the pandemic, but historically that we've seen, help us get our education system fully funded, help us move things forward around our mental health system. I mean, $543 million is not chump change. That is a huge amount of money.
Why still do it if it's not going to cover the shortfall that they're so worried about?
Well, the thing is that this is something that's needed to be done for a long time. And when the economy is good, nobody's running around saying, oh, we need to update our revenue streams and our revenue systems, even though we desperately need to do those things, even when the economy is good. And so for us, it's really important, because if we're not willing to have this conversation now, when our state is literally desperate for money, then when are we going to have this conversation? We have not revisited in a real way our revenue streams and our revenue system since 1961 in this state.
Now, as Magnus said, there are actually 3 separate resolutions that would deal with raising mining taxes. The main one, as she said, is Assembly Joint Resolution 1, AJR 1. That's from the special session over the summer. None of them have scheduled a vote yet. Here are some other bills that were introduced this week. One would protect schools from coronavirus-related lawsuits. Assembly Bill 159 was introduced by Republican Assemblyman Ira Hansen. It would prevent personal injury or wrongful death lawsuits against public schools because of COVID exposure, as long as the health guidelines are being followed at the time. If passed, it would kick in as soon as the state of emergency is lifted in Nevada. Another new bill requires insurance companies to cover the treatment of gender dysphoria. Senate Bill 139 is sponsored by Democratic State Senators Melanie Shively and Dallas Harris. The coverage would include things like hormone therapy treatment or gender reassignment surgery. It would also require private insurance companies and Medicaid to cover treatments for other sexual disorders. A bill to do away with daylight saving time is once again up at the state legislature. Daylight saving time is, of course, federal law. The bill asks Governor Sisolak to ask President Biden to get rid of the time change. Senate Bill 153 would only take effect, though, if California does the same change, and that would keep us both states on Pacific Standard Time. Now, this might sound familiar. Lawmakers passed a similar resolution back in 2015. However, that resolution asked to keep Nevada on the same time as Arizona, which would be 1 hour ahead of California in the wintertime. Again, this one would put us in step with California. Don't change your clocks just yet. Next on Politics Now, representing their community.
My main objective is just to work really hard to make a difference for hardworking families.
Our conversation with new members of the Hispanic Legislative Caucus continues with Assemblywoman Elaine Marzola. And you may have heard the term Latinx before. What does it mean? Are people using it? We're going to explore Latinx next on Politics Now.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Democratic Assemblywoman Elaine Marzola represents District 21. That seat covers neighborhoods in the Southeast Valley, mainly around Silverado Ranch. Marzola is a Brazilian-born attorney, one of 3 new lawmakers joining the Hispanic Legislative Caucus. Christian Cazares explored her legislative priorities.
Representation, very important. How do you feel about that?
I think we're getting better. I think that, we still need some work, but definitely what you see in the legislature today versus 10 years ago in the, with Hispanic or just Latin representation period is very different. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Okay. And then my next question is, are you working on any bills? Are you, what's your game plan here, kind of, moving forward?
My main objective, it is my first session. I've never been in this position before, but my main focus, my main objective is just to work really hard to make a difference for hardworking families. Our kids need to get back to school. They need to get back to school safely, of course, but I think that's really, really important. And then another issue that is dear to my heart. Also, small businesses, we need to help them, get them off their feet, get them the assistance that they need so that they can either reopen or stay open, hire people back that, maybe they've had to let go during the pandemic. And also affordable health care is really, really important.
Anything that you've kind of had the opportunity to kind of get the ball rolling on any of these 4 items?
Not yet. I do have a affordable housing BDR that I am working on. Language is not has not been finalized yet, but it will give tools that we need in order to provide affordable housing funding, which I'm sure affordable housing is a huge issue here, whether in the South or in the North.
Indeed it is. That was our Christian Cazares interviewing Assemblywoman Elaine Marzola. You can check out our interviews with all 3 new members of the Hispanic Legislative Caucus over at 8newsnow.com. Now, you may have heard activists or politicians using the term recently, Latinx. Now, the X replaces the masculine Latino or the feminine Latina, makes the term gender neutral. As our Hector Mejia explains, while the movement to use Latinx is gaining traction around the world, very few Hispanics here in the U.S. actually use it.
I actually had to look it up.
I was also kind of like, whoa, why is there an X at the end?
The greater population remains divided, and so the X is a start, but it's not enough.
The Pew Research Center points out the gender-neutral term Latinx is being embraced by celebrities, politicians, and grassroots organizations.
Latinx folks are going to be the biggest voting bloc in this election.
In 2020, Apple even created a Latinx Heritage Month section with videos, playlists, and other content.
Not only does our community still struggle with internalized racism, it also struggles with internalized queerphobia and sexism.
A study by the Pew Research Center also found out that most Latino adults, 76%, have not even heard of the term, while 1 in 4 U.S. Hispanics have. Only 3% actually use it. Dr. Erica Abad is a professor at UNLV, where more than 25% of the students are Latino or Latinx.
Student life often uses it to promote their events.
Frederick Aldama has written more than 45 books on the topic, plus a documentary on Latinx superheroes.
We're sort of in a movement as opposed to a series of moments of representation in the media.
The Ohio State University professor says what's important here is that the community is the one behind the movement.
We've been told by the census, by the government, how to self-identify and how to call ourselves. We don't need to be prescriptive about it, like telling people you need to be self-identifying Latinx. This is really about giving us options.
The transgender non-binary community experiences too much violence on a daily basis. I don't want to see that anymore. And sometimes and something as simple as recognizing their gender pronouns, their name, and the terms they prefer makes a world of difference.
Hector Mejia, 8 News Now.
Now, that Pew Research Center study that we referenced there, it found young Hispanic women are among the most likely to use the term Latinx. We have a link to the study and more information over at 8newsnow.com. Next on Politics Now, ready to run. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto announces her re-election campaign, the case she's making, and how much money her campaign is going to be starting with. We have that coming up. Plus, Washington, D.C. Bureau correspondent Alexander Limon will talk about the nominee for the Secretary of the Interior and her ties to the West. It's 8 News Now.
You're watching Politics Now.
This week, Nevada Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto announced that she is running for re-election.
Just this last year, I was able to pass 13 pieces of legislation. And I did that because I reached across the aisle and worked with a Republican colleague, and we got it done in a Republican administration. So that tells you, kind of gives you an idea. The focus here is to really solving problems for people in my state, and that's not going to change.
Senator Cortez Masto is up for re-election in 2022. She's the first Latina to serve in the U.S. Senate. Cortez Masto chairs a subcommittee on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and that committee oversees public lands in the mining industry. Cortez Masto's FEC filings show her campaign started 2021 with more than $3 million on hand in cash. So far, no Republicans have formally declared that they're going to run against her. Another Nevada Democrat has snagged some key assignments in Congress. We're talking about Representative Dina Titus. She is the longest serving member of the Nevada delegation in Washington. She'll chair the Gaming Caucus and the Tourism Caucus. The Travel and Tourism Caucus has about 100 members. The Gaming Caucus, about 30. President Joe Biden's cabinet nominees are now going through their confirmation hearings in Washington. One position with a big influence here in Nevada is the Secretary of the Interior. New Mexico Congresswoman Deb Haaland started her confirmation hearings for that position this week. The government agencies under the Department of Interior control public lands, which, as you know, make up more than 85% of Nevada. New Mexico Congresswoman Deb Haaland is an historic nominee for Secretary of the Interior. She is a Native American woman, but her confirmation hearings have been pretty tough, one of the tougher ones for the Biden administration. We're joined by Alexander Limon to talk about some of the hang-ups that senators had about Congresswoman Haaland. What were some of the biggest concerns?
Well, I would say that the biggest concern about Congresswoman Deb Haaland's nomination for Secretary of Interior is her stance on fossil fuel production. And there was a lot of focus on whether she, as Secretary of Interior, and President Biden would move to permanently ban oil and gas drilling and exploration on federal lands and waters, and also on the issue of fracking. And in fact, some Republican senators really came out to speak strongly against Haaland's nomination, calling her a radical. You know, she is one of the most progressive members of Congress. They also tried to say that she's out of touch with the West. That's a little bit of a hard, thing to prove or to say, seeing as she is a congresswoman from New Mexico, but still they really tried to fight her nomination because, again, of the issue of fossil fuels. But Congresswoman Haaland actually did, pretty well during her confirmation hearings, fielding these questions. And she actually told senators that she thinks and she understands that fossil fuels do have to be a part of the country's energy strategy, at least for the foreseeable future.
Western states had quite a bit of conflict with the Interior Department under the Trump administration and Ryan Zinke, who used to run it during that administration. A lot of times the questions that are asked in these hearings kind of reflect what's important to the states, what's important to what would happen in the new Department of the Interior administration. I think we get a fair idea of this, but what kind of a direction do you expect, or will we expect to see in a Haaland-led Interior Department?
The reason that this is such a historic nomination is the fact that she is a Native American woman. And so one of the things that I think people say was lacking, not just during the Trump administration, but kind of historically has been lacking in the Department of Interior, is a strong representation of Native American tribes.
And of course, that was Alexander Limon from Washington, D.C. A date for the vote on Congresswoman Haaland has not yet been scheduled. Nevada's congressional delegation has a new proposal in Washington that could have some big benefits here in Las Vegas. It comes from Senator Cortez Masto and Congressman Stephen Horsford, and it encourages the hospitality industry to rehire workers and bring convention business. To do this, companies would get a tax credit to rehire those workers that were laid off during the pandemic, and travelers would get a credit on all their trade show-related expenses.
Our first order of business, of course, is crushing this virus, and we are making great progress in doing that. And as we defeat this virus, we need to quickly be able to rebound, and this bill will help us do that.
The bill also includes a credit for restaurants who renovate or increase their service post-pandemic. If this passes in Washington, all of the measures would be in place for several years. Next on Politics Now, protecting our great view. One of the earliest bills to pass a House in the legislature keeps Nevada's rural skies dark. We'll talk about it here on 8 News Now. Welcome back. Parts of rural Nevada have some of the, as you see there, darkest skies in the country. And a bill that has been passed by the state Senate aims to keep them that way. Senate Bill 52 lets the state give a dark sky designation to places that don't have a whole lot of artificial light or light pollution. The goal is to draw in more tourists who want to bask in the stars. The Senate passed the plan unanimously this week. It now heads over to the state assembly. All right, so now in What to Watch. It's the return of school here in Southern Nevada. Monday marks the first day some Clark County School District students in K through 3rd grade will head back to actual class on campus. We're going to keep an eye on how it goes in this first week. And next week also marks a year since our first coronavirus case here in Nevada. We're going to dig into where we are now with the pandemic and look back at the year of lockdowns and wearing masks, all coming up next week. We thank you very much for watching Politics Now. Don't forget you can stay up to date online on all the things happening in politics here in Nevada and around the country on 8newsnow.com. We'll see you back here next Saturday. Take care.